Keith is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, Pointer, naturally, with majors in forest management and forest administration, utilization, and minor in soils. We also have Robert Gotchie Jr., or BJ. He is a Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe tribal member. In 2023, he became the Wildland Fire Management Officer for the tribe after 17 seasons in the wildfire program. That's pretty impressive. BJ attended Itasca County College, or Community College, and received a diploma in wildland firefighting. He was nominated for the MNICS Award for Leadership during the 2022 fire season, and is also a member of the MNICS Operations Working Team, the Type 2 IA Subcommittee Team, and a co-lead in the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network. Mostly, BJ is a proud father and husband. He has 3 boys, in which he coaches their youth lacrosse program. We also have Kate Hagsten to my left, stage right. Kate has served as the Plants Program Director since 2018. Prior to working for Leech Lake, Kate was at the University of Minnesota Duluth, working on finishing her bachelor's degree in anthropology, and has a minor in GIS and natural history. Kate has an academic emphasis and passion for ethnobiology. And last but certainly not least, Tanya Roerick. Tanya has a master's degree in wildlife science. She has 12 years of experience in the wildlife field and has worked for the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe for 5 years as a wildlife biologist. She manages various research and management programs and projects on snowshoe hare, wolves, fisher, moose, double-crested cormorants, and other wildlife. She also collaborates with other agencies on game harvest, wildlife habitat projects, and protection of TES species. Welcome and thank you.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you guys are having a good time here, and I hope we continue to have a good time. I've been looking forward to this. I feel pretty passionate about what I do. I know when Levi was talking this morning, and he mentioned that he and I had these long talks at the end of the evening, him figuring out who I was and me figuring out who he was. There's a lot of truth to that. It helped guide how I feel about tribal forestry, and it's taken me in a lot of the direction that we're going now. So, we have a lot of talk. What is a healthy forest? How many different answers would you get in this room? You get a lot of different answers. It's all kind of by your own perspective. I believe a lot in landscape, and I was very adamant about the theme of this year's symposium. Looking at the forest through the trees is very important. Everything else besides just timber also matters. This is a picture that was from the Chippewa National Forest. Circa 1902. And this is right on the Leech Lake Reservation. You can see the size of the trees that were there. You can see the openness of the forest in spots. Now, we don't have a lot of this anymore. This is part of what we're trying to do. And realizing, you're going to hear it throughout our whole presentation here, as we reconnect with the land. It's kind of a one step forward, 2 steps back. We start doing one thing, and then we realize, well, to accomplish this, we also got to do this, and this. And much like the layers of an onion, you need all of these things to pile on top of each other. So we started at the very beginning. In 2015, I believe, we sent a letter. It came from our chairperson at the time, that was sent to the Chief of the Forest Service, saying that their Leech Lake band of Ojibwe didn't feel like the Chippewa National Forest was fully holding up their trust responsibility to the tribe. And the chief listened, and he sent a letter back to the Chippewa National Forest and CC'd us, saying that he was given direction to Chippewa National Forest staff to work with the tribe to draft desired vegetative conditions, to enter more into more PFDA projects, and create a decision-making model, So some of that unique history and legal foundation, I mean, you heard a lot of it from Ben Benoit this morning, that this was the Minnesota Forest. It was formed in 1902. It was made for the Chippewa, for preservation of forests for the Ojibwe people. And even in the name that we hear today, the Chippewa National Forest, it's inherent in the name. So it's very unique to us. And in 2019, we got a memorandum of understanding signed by both Leech Lake and the Chippewa National Forest. And we've been using that. And we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of time and effort into it. And these are the 4 things that the chief said that he wanted in there, and they became part of the memorandum of understanding that we did. Our desired vegetative conditions, what we drafted, what we wanted, using traditional ecological knowledge, and not just using it as a buzzword. These are things that I look at a lot of it like it's more holistic forestry. The idea, and Levi would tell you, everything matters. These things that I grew up calling weeds or junk trees or what have you. That everything matters. And it's a cycle. Expanding the use of the tribal forest, protected land, and development of a shared decision-making model. So that's there. So this is the overlap. It's a little bit better color than you could see this morning, so you can truly appreciate, that 90% of the reservation is inside the Chippewa National Forest. 40% of the Chippewa National Forest is inside the Leech Lake Reservation, more shared boundary than anywhere in the United States. And if we don't you look at that, you look at the reservation, you look at how engrossed it is into the Chippewa National Forest, it behooves us to work with them as partners. So that's what we went and set about to do. Those of you that heard me in the fire meeting yesterday, I have a tendency to get on my podium from time to time. But we've said for years, that the Leech Lake demographic has been kind of set aside, and not recognized fully for what it is. If you look at this here, it illustrates it very good. The circle on your left, that's the potlatch mill in the nation. The circle in the middle there, that was the paper mill in Grand Rapids. One uses a lot of red pine, one uses a lot of aspen. Now that aspen one has certainly decreased its numbers, but there's aspen on the west to the north. And now if you take a 50-mile radius just of those two, which is going to be the primary hauling distance for a mill, where people will get the premium, I would dare any one of you to try to fit Leech Lake Reservation any better into that overlay. So it has been over-harvested. It's recognized as a timber basket. So as we set about to do our desired vegetative conditions, we drafted these thinking we didn't want to corner ourselves. We didn't want to get ourselves so nailed down into one thing that, if we ever decide to tweak it a little bit, we're kind of stuck. But we kept them broad. And at a landscape focus, I mean, you can see right there, I mean, this is a PowerPoint I've used before, but the forest through the trees. This is where the title came for this year's symposium. We want to utilize the best available science, which is something that we need to do. Obviously we're going to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge, but I mean, the language that the Chippewa National Forest speaks, that industry speaks, that the Minnesota DNR speaks, I mean, they need science. And we got to bring the science to them, and we do our best to do that. And at the same time, enhancing tribal lifeways. So our DVCs, we broke them down into 3 categories. We've got cultural, ecological, and environmental justice. And they are what they are. I mean, culture is always ongoing. That's a point that we had to make. I think there's a lot of people that think, it has to be 50 years old to be culture. I mean, culture's happening today. Culture will happen tomorrow. The ecological ones, I mean, that's what we're going to be talking about here today, largely. And the environmental justice, the idea of scenic corridors, I mean, you get Western Pines scenic corridors, and you go up and down these roads and everything, and you see these silly buffers that they put on them. But the scenic corridors that the tribal members do, I mean, they're sometimes off the beaten path, a lot of times they're rivers, small streams, or what have you. I mean, those are also scenic corridors that deserve protection. And implementation must correspond with approved action. It's one of my personal favorites. It's a simple thing, and that all boils down to if you say you're going to do it, do it. There's a history. There used to be a history where we would have what was coined as meaningful consultation, and people would come in and they would say, we're going to do A, B, and C. Maybe we're not too keen on it. We're like, okay, that'll work. And then once the project kicks in and everything, we're like, well, what happened to B? Oh, we couldn't do that, so we changed it. And we did it whatever, and nobody would ever come talk. And these things change, and there's a reason maybe we wanted it to be a certain way. So, I mean, those things carry importance to them. So, increasing ecologically functioning old growth stands. And one thing I've learned over my career is you can't just throw everybody into one gigantic mix. I mean, I can't, like say the Chippewa National Forest, and see a couple of them out there. I mean, I can't say, you need to take 100,000 acres and make it better tomorrow. Can't do it. Nobody, I mean, who could? I mean, you can't get your head wrapped around that. So we look at these areas where they have mature forest, and we talked about just radiating out from those. Little tweaks that you can make, to keep a healthy forest and just kind of expand the whole idea a little bit. Make it something that a person can embrace, something that a person can handle doing. Scenic corridors, those are, they're right here. We had a couple of them added in, one of them being that red one down there where that's where Levi, the legend, shoots a lot of deer. So he wanted that protected, and he was very adamant about that. The cultural DVCs, culture, you can see on there, this is a slide that was put together by Ben Benoit, and I've always liked that. I mean, culture is personal. You can't measure culture. It's just something that is an impact to traditional cultural properties, their impacts to the tribe. Maintaining and protecting diverse hardwood stands. I mean, the important one, the one that a lot of people focus on here on the Leech Lake Reservation, are sugar bush, which, I mean, all of y'all from back in your college forestry days, you get sugar maple, a very shade tolerant species. And I used to tell people, I mean, everybody had to make them better. When I first started, I was told to try to make them better, and I hear from other agencies to try to make them better. And when a person would go out there and you would see a sugar maple bush, and because I'm a brilliant forester now, I go out there and I say, this is 25% growth, but I'm brilliant. I can fix that. So I go out there and I do my forestry magic, and I come back in 5 years for my required assessment of it, and I realized now it's 35% broken. But I know what I did wrong. I fix it again. I come back and it's 45% broken in another 5 years, and then I start to realize that, maybe these shade tolerance stands are best as left alone. Maybe they know what they want. If we're not looking to get early successional species in them, and we have a shade tolerant species that it's going to promote itself, and the worst thing we could do is probably bring earthworms into it. Maybe we're best off not doing any management, just letting it do its own thing. We have our aspen initiative. Again, I always feel like I could apologize to everybody out west when we bring this one up, because I know there's a lot of people that are always trying to get more aspen. And I beg them, please take whatever you want. And when I was back in college, some 20-some years ago, I had a summer job. I was working for one of the counties that overlap onto the Leech Lake Reservation, and I had one boss that's telling me how difficult his job is managing aspen. And even then, as a college student, I called him a liar. And I told him, it doesn't get any easier than it. It is self-thinning. It comes back aggressively. If you want an aspen or a stem full of aspen, just cut the whole thing. If there's aspen in it, it'll be full of aspen. So you cut, wait, repeat. That's it. You don't even have to go back out there. So because of that, because of the ease of it and the value, there's an overabundance of aspen here. And a lot of the other agencies don't especially care to talk about it because it's hard to turn aspen back into a direction that it should be going. It's hard to get that diversity out there. Now, I would wager, and I haven't done the research on it, but I would wager that there's probably the aspen type that is up here the most. It's probably 90% waking aspen. And is Steve Hamler still here? Anywhere? Do you leave? Now, in the climate change world, those climatologists guys that are way smarter than I'll ever be about climate science, they'll tell you what their projections are is that waking aspen's going to leave the area. Are they right? I don't know. Who does? But, we're trying to apply the best available science. And if it says it's going to leave you, I'll trust those guys. The one thing that scares me the most about climate science, a few years ago I don't know if you guys remember the Amazon forest burning up. That big old fire down there. Made national news, and they asked them world-renowned climatologists, how is this going to affect climate? He said, I don't know. That scared the shit out of me. I don't know. I don't know these things. But that smart guy, the fact that he didn't know, that should scare people, right? So then now, and this is a lot of what we're going to be looking at during the field trip, is restoring conifers to ecologically functioning systems. There was a DNR employee who worked, I believe, his entire career around this area. He's a brilliant man. His name was Harvey Jader. He just passed away last year. And I can remember Harvey saying, although there was natural and native red pine all over the place, he believed that there was more actual red pine trees in the ground than there probably was here historically because of red pine plantations. And these were ones where, I mentioned it in the fire thing, Jim Erickson, a lot of you remember him. He got after me when they came up here maybe 10 years ago or something like that. He was looking at our red pine plantations. He's like, Keith, you only got 20% light prong on this. What are you doing? These things are screwed. So, I've never forgotten that, and what we're trying to do is get in thin early, thin often, thin aggressively. You're going to see that on our field trip tomorrow. And the whole idea is to try to retain a live prong of upwards 50-60%. Something where a tree can grow, where it can get big, where it can maybe be a little more resistant to climate change issues as they arise. Now, again, the forest through the trees. If you look at this image on here, we came in at the blue arrow. That was our historic. That was the Chippewa National Forest coming in. And they got some maps and they got their project, and this is what we're going to do. What do you guys think? And part of that letter that went to the chief. Part of it was Tim embrace the idea of co-management on the Chippewa National Forest lands. And so now we look at where we're trying to come in at the orange arrow, prior to proposal development, where we come in and some of the tribe's ideas about how a Forest Service project is going to move forward and why it's going to move forward, what direction it's going to move forward, that gets incorporated now. It's been a learning process, but I think it's been really rewarding, I think, for both sides. You all have seen Ben Benoit, I would say, grill him a little bit about, how real fun the first project was. He'll bend your ear. So then that moves us into the Tribal Forest Protection Act, which is something that, we have 5 of them. I don't know how many of you remember Sonia Thomas, and I don't remember which ITC it was, when she first brought up and she presented on the Tribal Forest Protection Act. I'm like, wow, that might work for me. That might work for Leech Lake. And I went and I asked her, I want to talk to you about this Tribal Forest Protection Act. She asked me, where are you from? I said, Leech Lake, Vanderbilt. She said, I want to talk to you. And she said that, we're like a poster child. We have this incredible overlap for that, for reserve treaty rights, lands grants, which we'll get into, for all of this. The first PFPA we moved into, I wanted to start again at a small scale because I've seen it paralyze people when you do something and you just throw too big a scale at them. It is absolutely paralyzing. So we did a 48-acre TFPA project for pine restoration, for pine finish. And after we did that one, then I said, well, that went okay. Everybody said that. It did. Went good. We should do more. So I did another one for over 15,000 acres of pine and spruce thinning on the Chippewa National Forest. It encompassed all of their plantations of white spruce and red pine between 20 and 40 years old. But the idea being that 20 years from now, 15 years from now, I guess, but the TFPA is not over. The idea is changing the mindset, changing the paradigm, which you'll see later. Going in and thinning these things earlier, it just happened. We all got capacity issues, and to get into a stand at the appropriate time, it's hard to do. But this is something, and I've had discussions with industry on this, the idea of going in early, thinning it often, thinning it aggressively, keeping that annual growth big. The trees are putting meat on it, and we're going to thin them a lot. We're doing it with the tribe's blessing because, that's the end game, is this restored forest, kind of like you saw in the 1902 picture. Parts of it anyways. So when we did that 15,822 acres, and we got looking at it, all the red you see on the map, that's all the red pine plantations that were between 20 and 40 years old on Chippewa National Forest. And all the white is the white spruce between 20 and 40 on Chippewa National Forest. And you see kind of in the center towards the left a little bit, there's a heavy concentration of red pine stands. Right there. We had a focus on that, and I don't know if Stephanie Lucero's in the room, but we had a workshop for TFPA that was funded partially by ITC. And I went out there, and a counterpart from the Chippewa National Forest went out there, and we started to work on this project. We focused on this project for the week, and it became known as the Sand Plains Pine Project. And that's where we're going to have all of our field trip stops are in that project tomorrow. It's just looking at different things, different layers of the onion as we're starting to put this together. The scope and scale of our pine, it was, it's always about blueberries a lot of times, but I'm a big believer in native plant communities, and Levi was right. I remembered when he said, these trees aren't supposed to grow in this soil. That was definitely me saying that. I realize that there's anomalies, but as a whole, I believe in science, and I think our native plant community classification manual for the state of Minnesota, I think is top shelf. I think it's a very, very good manual. And that helps guide more entry-level foresters and everything into the direction that these things could be pushed. So Levi was right, that was in the wrong spot. Now, one of the TFPAs we did was their snowshoe hare habitat. And I don't know as much about bunnies as Tanya, so she's going to come up and talk on this.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to share a bit about snowshoe hare, a bit about the research and management and how that resulted in the TFPA and the management that you're going to see tomorrow on the field trip. But first, I need to acknowledge our partners in this. This was initiated by the Leech Lake Band, but it wouldn't have been possible without our partners at the Forest Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and Fish and Wildlife Service, who supported the research, and then now the Forest Service really helping us with that implementation on the ground. So snowshoe hare, this whole project came about because of how important they are to the Leech Lake Band. They are an important food source and fur source historically to tribal members. They're still used to this day by some tribal members. Our tribal college actually had an event just a few months ago learning how to harvest snowshoe hare and how to prep it for food. So it's something that still lives on in the culture to this day and is really important to the band. On top of that, snowshoe hare are essentially the cheeseburgers of the forest. Everything wants to eat them. So they're the main source of prey for a lot of our predators, and that includes Canada lynx, fisher, marten, goshawk, and all of those species are on the band's threatened, endangered, and sensitive species list. So if we have a stable or healthy snowshoe hare population, we can, in theory, have good predator populations as well and keep those sensitive species on our landscape. And historically, snowshoe hare populations were abundant enough, and across the landscape, they altered tree and shrub composition through their browsing. But we don't really see that today anymore, at least not in this area. So here at Leech Lake, we're at the very southern edge of snowshoe hare range. In literature, it states like that up in the north more, you're going to see more of those cyclical patterns of highs and lows. But as you get to the southern end of the range, that kind of peters out and you don't notice it as much. However, tribal elders and community members that have been here for years remember decades ago of having a cyclical hare population. That's not so much the case anymore. I'd say within the last 20, 30 years, the hare population has decreased substantially and has just remained really, really low. And we're seeing populations blink out in spots across the reservation. So this led us to wanting to do a research project to figure out what's limiting snowshoe hare on the Leech Lake Reservation. So we looked at habitat composition and structure, and we related that to how they're surviving, their space use, their interactions, and then we wanted to use that research to develop forest management guidelines to enhance snowshoe hare habitat. So we did this through a multi-scale approach. At the landscape scale, we did occupancy surveys. We estimated snowshoe hare densities at the stand scale. At the home range scale, we collared snowshoe hare, and then we looked at their habitat selection, and then we monitored those individual hare to determine survival. So overall, during that time period, we collared 96 snowshoe hare. This research project is still going on, so we've actually collared a lot more hare since then, but our results from the study that influenced the forest management decisions we're making came up with these original 96 snowshoe hare. So we had 35 of them die, and we actually had a large amount, like 25 to 30 collars, not work on us. We don't know the fate of those snowshoe hare. But of those 35 that we were able to track and die, 91% of those died from predators. So that is the main source of mortality, and it wasn't necessarily just one predator that was killing snowshoe hare. It ranged from canids to raptors to weasel species. It wasn't just one animal, it was many. So some of the results that we found from our pellet surveys and habitat surveys is that snowshoe hare need really dense cover, and that cover needs to be lifted up off the ground. It can't just lay flat, and that's because they hide underneath it. They can't outrun their predators, rather they dodge from cover point to cover point. So it's really important to have it uplifted off the ground, and we determined with a cover board about 65 to 85% visual cover in a stand. And ideally a hare would have something to hide under every 12 to 20 feet for what we would consider really good hare habitat. And the only areas in our forest that currently have that type of habitat to support a stable or just have a snowshoe hare population present is in lowland conifer stands, and that's primarily northern white cedar in this area. So the thought is these northern white cedar stands are these high quality areas, and that as the population would build up, you'd start to see snowshoe hare populations in that secondary habitat and maybe into even further out from that in really poor habitat, but probably not lasting overly long. And then as populations decrease, they're retreating back to that high quality core habitat. So we don't see as much of that expansion out of that core area anymore. They're pretty much contained in those core areas, and there's not very much connectivity on the landscape between those areas. So what kind of habitats are they using? What does hare habitat actually look like? And it's made up of a lot of coarse woody material, old growth characteristics. Brush piles make really, really great hare cover. There is actually a bunny in this picture, and if you look for the little black eye, it's right there in the star. But it just provides really great cover, and they can hide from predators in that easily. And then it can also be as simple as just a down log on the ground. So having a variety of cover like this provides a lot of different opportunities for snowshoe hare to hide and blend in. There's a hare in this picture as well, if you want to take a minute to look for it. But snowshoe hare do also use conifers with low-hanging branches, and they provide really great cover and helps them blend in, especially like in this winter type setting that you see here. And then it can also be like a tip up or really any coarse woody debris on the ground that's elevated that they can get into and hide. So winter seems to be the most limiting to snowshoe hare, most likely because our snow levels are high enough that they're covering a lot of the coarse woody debris that's on the ground, so it's really limiting that there's not a lot of options for them. In summer, we start to see them expand out a little bit from those cedar stands, and this is what a typical cedar stand looks like in summer, just with a lot of coarse woody debris, lots of hiding material under it. But so around those cedar stands, a lot of the stands look like this. They're all vertical in nature. You look at it, and there's really nothing for a snowshoe hare to hide under. So they get outside these cedar stands, and they're picked off pretty fast by predators. These are really extreme examples with the red pine and spruce plantation, but they do exist on the landscape, and again, there's nothing for snowshoe hare to hide under. We also have quite a bit of hazel out on our forest, and in the summer, this might provide good aerial cover for snowshoe hare when it has leaves on it, but from the ground standpoint, if you're a fisher or martin, you could easily pick off a snowshoe hare in this type of habitat. So naturally, snowshoe hare habitat was created by stand replacing fires, blowdown, coarse woody material, and snakes. But the problem is we no longer allow stand replacing fires, we salvage our blowdown, and there's not the amount of coarse woody debris on the landscape that there used to be. So that brings in the question of how do we create snowshoe hare habitat on the landscape? How do we work with what we have? And so we created these management recommendations that we later implemented on the ground, trying to create just getting more coarse woody material out there. So we looked at retaining more snakes and coarse woody material during harvest, increasing those conifers with those branches, especially balsam fir. That could be through planting or just trying to keep them during the harvest. Retaining and promoting stand diversity, to increase coarse woody materials using tree drops, using slash piles from remaining tree material and altering skid patterns, and then making sure that coarse woody material is kept off the ground. And so we're focusing this management within a half mile of a northern white cedar stand. And so any forest management that's going on there. We're looking for opportunities to enhance snowshoe hare habitat in those stands and start creating these bigger pockets for them to survive in, because previous research has shown that they need about 50 hectares of good quality habitat to be able to have a hare population that can persist. So we're thinking if we can make those patches bigger for them, start connecting them so there's more genetic flow, we might be able to save our snowshoe hare population. And to make sure that what we were suggesting was something that snowshoe hare would use, and that we weren't crazy with what we were wanting to see in the landscape, we went out and monitored an area within a 1.5 mile of cedar stand, so chances snowshoe hare is going to wander through. And we just started adding material to it. And we will come back each month and just add more and more. And I don't think it's going to play because I don't think we have the ability, but this was a video of a cute little snowshoe hare hanging out in this pile, and he camped out all winter. At some of our other spots, it took a matter of a couple days for hare to find these piles. Some it took a couple months, but they were actually all eventually found by a snowshoe hare. What we also found using those piles is a lot of small mammals and birds, which was really great to see. But then we also noticed that just about every predator we have on the reservation was targeting these piles and checking them out for prey opportunities. And so to us, this meant that these types of piles were really limiting across the landscape, that they know that there's a good chance they're going to find food in these. So we want to even the playing field a bit, and if we can put across the landscape a lot of coarse woody debris or a lot of piles, maybe snowshoe hare would have a better chance of surviving. They have more structure to hide under. And these predators don't have as easy of a meal. They got to work a little harder for it. So all of this research and finding led to the Snowshoe Hare Tribal Forest Protection Act. And this was developed because of how important snowshoe hare are to the Leech Lake Band, and we wanted to demonstrate at a site that we could create and enhance snowshoe hare habitat that could be implemented at a landscape scale. So this was the Hare TFPA site. In purple is 2 cedar stands with not very great habitat connecting the 2 of them. In the green is spruce, the blue aspen, and the red red pine. And so the red pine was just your typical red pine plantation. Same with the spruce plantation, not much for cover. And the aspen stand offered a bit more diversity, but it still did not have a lot of coarse woody material out on the ground. So with the aspen stand, we dropped up to 20 trees per acre. This area was about 20 acres in size. And this is just what it looked like after in some areas, just trying to get coarse woody material on the landscape. And we're really grateful for the Chippewa National Forest fire crew for felling all of the trees for us to make that project happen. And then the white spruce stand, this stand was thin. A quarter of the stand was removed, and then the branches and tops that would normally go into a skid trail, we actually put those into piles, and they were approximately 5 feet by 5 feet and 5 feet high, and spaced ideally 20 feet apart, but obviously when you're dealing with machinery and just with the amount of material available, it didn't always happen that way. But this is just what it looks like on the landscape, and it worked really well with this cut-to-length machinery, and we really liked the results and what we saw. And I believe the white spruce was about 40 acres in size, and we ended up with about 29 piles per acre. So in the red pine stand, we did something similar. We thinned up to 1/3 of the stand. We also placed gaps in the stand. And then again, the tops and branches were all put into piles, same as the spruce. And there wasn't as much material in the red pine stand, so they're spaced a little bit further apart. We still managed to get 20 piles per acre in this area, so still fairly well. It will be interesting to see as we implement this more across the landscape, whether different ages of trees can contribute more or less to the piles, and other management considerations we can do with it. So what we learned was this really is possible. We weren't sure if we could get this going on the ground in we were able to, and we think it's something we can implement on a landscape scale. And this required a lot of people, a lot of work, both from Leech Lake DRM and the Chippewa National Forest. It's too many people to name and thank individually, but it included more than just biologists and timber personnel, soil scientists, fire personnel, because we're creating more debris on the landscape that could be a fire risk. So just a lot of people, a lot of planning. And I won't get into the logistics today. I'm going to save that for tomorrow if you're coming out on the field trip, how we're doing some more of this implementation on the ground, some of our struggles on each side with how we find the funding or the contracting and making that work happen. So right now we're monitoring that TFPA site. We're doing pile measurements, seeing how long those piles persist on the landscape, which will be really important because some of these areas are actually looking at being prescribed bird in the future, but it's a ways out, so we don't foresee it being an issue, but it's something we need to be aware of so we know for future projects. We're also doing various vegetation measurements out there, making sure that we are achieving the objectives that we want to see in the landscape. And then our staff is actually surveying for habitat enhancement opportunities for hare. They've surveyed 38,000 acres in the last couple of years. And then we're working on proposing a landscape scale snowshoe hare TFPA. So this is something that gets into all forest vegetation projects on the landscape. And then we're also starting to approach other agencies on this work. We've approached DNR and they've put it into some of their timber sales now too. They think it's doable, and so within the next couple of years we should start seeing some of those results. And then we're continuing to investigate other aspects of snowshoe hare ecology. We actually just had a grad student wrap up some research with us working with predator densities on the landscape. So that's all I have to share for now, and hopefully you guys can make it out to the snowshoe hare field trip tomorrow.
We did a pine spruce thinning TFPA, a small 48 acre one. We increased that to go big or go home. We did it on 15,800 some odd acres. And the reason we ended up doing a snowshoe TFPA, one of our wildlife folks keeps saying, well, I mean, TFPA sounds great, but what am I supposed to do? You know, I told him, well, you can make it work for you. And he kind of plucked snowshoe hare as an idea. And Tanya has run with it in the past few years. I mean, she's built it into something. Every agency that has land inside the Leech Lake Reservation is familiar with Tanya's snowshoe hare TFPA. So we figured things were going good, you know. So I figured, well, I talked to a lot of people about 800-pound gorillas in rooms. You know, a lot of times you get in a room and, you know, we'll have a good conversation, but maybe I got an issue with you, and that hovers in the air. I ain't gonna bring it up. You don't bring it up, and it's just sitting there hovering, right? This 800-pound gorilla. So we decided to do an aspen TFPA, and for that one, the Chippewa National Forest is what, 500,000 acres total inside and out the reservation? They got 210,000 and change are aspen alone, categorized as aspen, 72,000 that are inside the Leech Lake Reservation, most of which are 0 to 40 years old. That's a problem. So we decided we're going to do a TFPA and we're going to try and address it. So the first thing we did up a map of just Chippewa National Forest lands, just aspen. That's what you're looking at there. The color code is 0 to 40, 41 to 65, over 65. You can see the red is 0 to 40. There's a lot of aspen on the landscape on the Leech Lake Reservation. Again, aspen's really easy. I mean, cut, wait, repeat. And if you have a stand around here, if you have a stand and say it's 50, 60% aspen, you decide it needs to be clear cut for whatever reason, so you clear cut it. When it comes back, you're going to be looking at 80, 90% aspen. That's the nature of aspen. I mean, it is so aggressive around here when it comes back, and it just decreases diversity. diversity is a mantra, you know, you hear it all the time, you know, when it comes to climate change. I mean, diversity is kind of king, right? Gotta have some of that. And it is, I don't know, one of the guys from Menominee, he called it the weed, right? But I call it the dandelion of the forest. I mean, it just grows there anywhere. Now, this is what a lot of the other agency sales look like, you know, and it's done at the expense of other values, you know, and that's something my bosses, Farron, you heard Farron talk this morning. They never come and ask me how much money can we generate from a timber sale. They never ask that. They don't care. Timber revenue means nothing to them. They want me to look at these other values. And so that's what we're trying to do. So we decided where this is, 72,000 acres. It's kind of a big one. Again, try to get your head wrapped around how are you going to handle, how are you going to manage something like that. Well, the first thing we do is broke it in half. We said half of these stands are in fire-dependent native plant communities, the other half are in music northern Ireland communities. The fire-dependent ones, a lot of times going to be your off-site aspen, a little bit junkier aspen, but it still makes volume, you know. So we're saying clear cut that if you have to, or near clear cut, keep a few residual trees, but then do some heavy site prep and start getting something that's a little more reminiscent of what a fire-dependent community is according to the native plant community. In a music hardwood stand, if the volume, the number of trees out there that are aspen are generally old and we just want it to succeed, it's an olive branch for Tanya. We just tell them let it senesce, let it fall over, let it become horizontal structure and then play a different value in the forest. Don't need to cash in on all of them. So, as if the aspen TFPA wasn't enough to stir up a little bit of angst with people, then we decided we're going to do a TFPA for fire restoration as well. That really got a good time rolling now. So, and a lot of it we saw with the original pine thinning project, the original TFPA that we were doing. I mean, we're going out there and it's a sea of hazel, just a sea of it. And I don't see Margot in here. And she told me one time, she said, if you're going to cut hazel, it's just going to get happy and come back thicker. And she's right. You know, and we're seeing, you know, we have to do this multiple times and we're realizing it. And the real reason that hazel is so thick on these sites is because of the absence of fire. You know, so we were finding, you know, we need to try to boil this back to its bare essentials. Why? What was the cause of the issue? The cause of the issue was fire was not allowed in there. And so to do that, to start getting rid of the hazel and prepping the area for fire restoration, we approached the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I saw Marty in here, I know he's here somewhere, and we applied for a Reserve Treaty Rights Land grant to start addressing the issue.
Hello, good afternoon. I get the pleasure of talking to you about Reserved Treaty Rights Land Grant, which is another mechanism for us to achieve some of these goals on the landscape. And so for the newbies in the room that aren't familiar with Reserved Treaty Rights Lands Grant, it was initiated back in 2015 under the BI, the Fuels Management Funding, with the intended purpose of treating and restoring tribal landscapes within and adjacent to reserved treaty right lands. So the primary function of this is to recognize that connection with our citizens and to help restore some of the ecology that we're looking for on the landscape. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about this because, again, if you're coming on the field trip tomorrow, you're going to stop at one of our sites where we conduct a lot of our monitoring. But just a general overview. So the other gorilla in the room is our hazel abundance, and it is very true that right now it is happy by the amount of brushing that's been going on. But the funding provided through RTRL, for the first 3 years, Leech Lake was able to contract out to get a lot of the brushing conducted. And with our partnership with the Forest Service, we will continue to move forward in brushing those areas. I believe I read somewhere in the literature that it takes about 15 years for hazel to kind of take a step back after you've been treating it and going in and creating disturbance on it. So I think I got 15 years in me, and I'm really looking forward to the day where I get to go out to these areas and have some fruiting hazel on our hands and not have to swim through it instead. So in addition to the brushing that's going on, our plants department, and I have to give my kudos, I'm going to have my moment here to give the kudos to Garrett Williams, who's way back there, who's been monitoring and setting up all of our plots and doing data analysis. And again, we'll get into a lot of more detail on that. So the other folks in the room that I wanted to address are our tribal college students. We couldn't do this without them. It's been a wonderful opportunity for us to meet new faces and be further inspired by the passion that our students bring to our program. So we have Garrett there, and Nicole Roberts, and Jerome Johnson, and Josh Brisky, and Joey Riley. So thank you everybody for that. So, shoot, I forgot I'm supposed to do the clicker too. So okay, we'll back up a little bit. Did I miss anything? Oh, one of the other things that we've been monitoring, and it's been a great opportunity to have folks out there, is looking at how some of our forest management practices might be spreading some invasive species on the landscape. So in the plants department, a lot of our job is focused on invasive species, and it is another big issue that we work with a lot of agencies on, of course, but the perspectives that I've gotten from our leadership is that, you know, these invasive species didn't ask to be here. They were brought here, and we need to have a good understanding of where they are in the landscape. So moving forward with climate change effects happening, what we might be looking to for our future forest conditions. And I want to spend some time again for our tribal college interns there. So where we're at now, again, it goes back to what Keith had mentioned. We're using the best available science. We're fortunate to have the Northern Research Station here with Brian Palak, and he has a book out called Ecological Silviculture. He is, oh, there's more stuff there. These are the recommendations that his research has, and it just, again, further reiterates that goal that we're trying to achieve with our desired forest conditions. I think that wraps it up for me, and we go into BJ.
So just going back one slide. So obviously we're seeing in the 30 to 70 year gap of that for the young forest. They do talk about prescribed fire, and that's kind of where I come to play. You know, being a tribal member from Leech Lake, having grown up here my whole life, mostly on the eastern part of the reservation and a bit of Baca. You know, historically we had fire in the land. You know, we did do a lot of firing. I remember being a kid, even, you know, doing prescribed burns as a kid, not knowing that they were called prescribed burns. You know, it was just a family thing, a community thing that we did. But knowing that the big green truck was going to come and stop it. But our family still continued doing fire in our land, and we used it historically, you know, for different reasons, whether far back as when we played lacrosse, Vada Gawaning. That's our giveaway for saying lacrosse. That's the picture of your left. So there was a lot of games. That's the same area where I grew up and where we played the game traditionally. And we did, you know, it was pre-treated, you know, with fire to, have the field be available to play, to have the games ready to be played, whether that was for healing reasons or trading reasons. We've had some people talk about, well, how did we get Flint up here? I mean, some theory or some thoughts would say that, it was part of this game where we would bring it to trade. The winning team would get to pick what they wanted in trade. So maybe that's why we have Flint. There was a lot of talk about that so far this week on how we had that stuff up here. But yeah, and then you look at some of the natives in the other picture that, in the past, you see them standing there with very minimal brush. That's roughly knee high. We traveled, we weren't stationary people, we moved around from lakes due to the season, whether that was for sugar cane, or in the springtime would be sugar cane, and the summer would be for berries, the winter time or the fall time, for deer hunting, wild rice. And you see a lot of these areas where historically there has been fire in, and it was because we moved around. So trying to bring fire back into the landscape that's been avoided for a long time now. Here's one of our, for our tribal members, for blueberries and raspberries, for traditional foods, for medicine. Yeah, so for blueberries and raspberries and traditional medicines that our tribal members go out there and gather, and here's a couple pictures of a site that we did burn, and then a couple years later there are some of our youth, who we do this for, and our next generations, to have this lush vegetation of berries where they can go pick, and get their fruiting shrubs, and their elders get traditional medicines. And that's one of our burns that we did that, after a few years, the kids came in there and picked blueberries. Mainly ate them on the spot and we took them home. And with all this, it's been a lot of collaborating with the Forest Service. We do spend, it's working together. Like I said, as a kid, I spent a lot of my time as a kid worrying about the big green truck coming. And now that I've grown, and now that the traditional concept of restoring the fire to the traditional ways, this is what we're doing. This is what I'm doing for my people as I work side to side, hand in hand with the Forest Service. As a tribal member, we do prescribe burning. And teach youth, that fire is good. That it is good. Ishpade. That means it's good fire. And we go out there and tell them that the fire is not always bad, and we show the kids, what good fire is all about. Teach them, not just using Smokey the Bear messages, stuff like that.
So, all of that, what you've been hearing from Kate, Tanya, and BJ, I mentioned it earlier, the idea of changing the paradigm. Things, how they used to be in the past. Thank you, by the way, Tim. You're the first person that coined this phrase. You're the first one I heard it from. So, shout out to Mr. Miller. So now, the idea that some of you has heard me talk in the fire pre-symposium workshop yesterday, and I like to think of like the forest, that it's all about growing space, right? And a lot of these berry producing plants need growing. They need growing space. And forestry, there's a term that comes out of the Bouquet Forestry Center, which is an offshoot of the University of Minnesota, and they're calling it adaptive silviculture. And I've talked to them about that. I tell them, you ought to just call it silviculture. And regular silviculture, maybe it's time to call that antiquated silviculture. The idea of, growing all of these trees and using all of the growing space for the trees. That's the idea. That's what we're taught in forestry college. That's what we're supposed to do. And that's the paradigm I'm hoping to change. Realizing that we need industry, absolutely. No doubt about it, number one tool we have. Hopefully maybe fire can take over for that someday, but we need them right now. But all of the timber sales, what I've always seen over the years is the idea that, when I look at other agencies, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? I gotta get wood to the local mill. Leech Lake doesn't own a mill. They do have, usufructuary rights over all those lands inside the Leech Lake Reservation. Also, why the wood going to the mill doesn't matter much to Leech Lake. Wood being cut should be used merely as a means to an end. The ecosystem restoration should be the goal. That should be the paradigm shift that's what we're trying to shift. To change it into a means to an end instead of the end in and of itself. So, back to BJ.
So in 2018 with the Farm Bill, we have a 638 contract authority that, made a lot of things active and working forward for the tribes. Having more tribe, working within the Forest Service and having more control on what goes on. So here's one of our 638 prescribed burns that we're looking to do. I was really hoping to have this burnt off before the symposium, but for different reasons it did not happen. So we're still in the stage of working on moving towards the prescribed fire of a 638. A 638 within the reservation and within the Forest Service. Roughly 48 acres, mostly red pine. Before the treatments in 2016, this is what that area looked like. So it's hard to see. Our division director that passed away this past spring, his message to us was always he wants to see the forest. He wants to see through the forest. And that's part of our story. And he said he remembers being a kid and be able to walk through there and hunt and see deer for a long way. So that's always been true to me and to make that happen. So in 2016, within that 638 prescribed fire, we thinned it, and then in 2017, we removed some brush out of there. This picture here is a 2020. And then in 2022, we thinned it again. And moving forward, we're hoping to have the prescribed burn that with the map I showed earlier. And then we go into phase 2, that's phase 2 of thinning it. And, hopefully plans are moving into fire. So it brings it into phase 3.
Yeah, there really isn't a phase 3 yet. We're gonna have to wait a few years, but ultimately what we're trying to do, if you can, again, remember that picture from 1902 and the one that was in BJ's earlier portion of the presentation. Phase 3, we're gonna actually open up larger gaps. We're gonna artificially put in some fruiting shrubs, because they're missing now. It's been so long, they're missing, and the project that's what we're intending to do. But lessons learned from all of this, this is all taken place in the past 8 years. This has been 8 years of work that we're talking about here. This isn't 100 years worth of stuff. We've learned that you need strong support from both sides. If I just sit there and I'm screaming at Chippewa National Forest staff or state DNR staff, hey, we need to do this, and nobody's listening, it's kind of pointless. I'm just gonna hurt my throat. I believe you start small. I think there's a comfort zone that people need to find. So you work into it. You gotta dip your toes into it, get a little bit comfortable. But I always tell everybody, they're like, well, when does the tribe want this done? I tell them, and they wanted it done yesterday. They want all of it done yesterday. So, we gotta think big. If all we're gonna do is nickel and dime with little projects, that's all we're gonna get is little accomplishments. So I believe you have to look big. And think way back to the beginning of the presentation, idea of the onion. We've had that now with our pine spruce thinning. A lot of that red pine is on fire dependent stands, and to get that there, we need to utilize our TRL. We need to take the brush down while we're thinning, while we're getting meat on the bark. We need to plan to get that fire in, and somewhere in between there, Tanya's doing snowshoe air work, which is putting these little bunny piles out there that we can't burn them. Because it's a fire dependent stand, we could kill the trees because the bark's not thick enough yet. So we need to time all that, and so it's just layer upon layer upon layer. That's the way I look at forest management. The idea of back when I was talking to that fella that was my boss in Itasca County, and he was telling me how hard it is to manage aspen. And I think about, what am I trying to do these days? And try to incorporate everything. Some days I wish I was back there. Maybe I could go harvest aspen again, but no, I love it. I absolutely love what we do. Levi had mentioned about everybody, you kind of create these boxes for yourself. I tell people all the time, TFPA is allowing us to think outside the box, but at the same time, what I've found over this past 8 years is that there's a million different ways to manage a forest. There's any almost countless number of things you can do, but try to change some of these management ideas that are ingrained in people's heads and have been from one job mentor to another throughout decades. Try and change it. That's a very hard thing to do. People know what they know, and there's a tendency to be stubborn. Inherently, people don't like change. And so they fight against it, and trying to get people just to open up, embrace a little risk. So then if that happens, which it is happening, that's what the outcomes you get from that. You get stronger relationships. I can remember when I first started working for the Leech Lake Reservation way back in 2004, and there were meetings, these meaningful consultation meetings that the Chippewa National Forest was mandated to have at the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, and we'd walk into these rooms. They'd all be sitting down on one side. We would walk in. Nobody says a word. And you could just feel the tension in the air. Now we walk in and we're joking, and maybe we talk about the weather, maybe we talk about the Twins, maybe we talk about Ben Benoit taking Mike racing last year and showing him how to do it. I could call him Mike. He's a supervisor. He's a big cheese, but I call him Mike. So, gives you better management practices. We talk about these things much more holistically. You incorporate everything. I've seen agencies where wildlife has to just carve out a part of a timber project, or botany has to carve out a part of a timber project, and that's what they get. They're constantly fighting for scraps. Now, when we're doing our projects and when we're working collaboratively with the Chippewa National Forest, Tanya and Kate are at the table, equal say. Everybody's sitting at the table, equal say, and it's snowshoe hare habitat. It isn't just in this little corner of the stand. How are we going to incorporate that, make that a meaningful thing across this broad spectrum? And it gives us the potential to figure out all these layers and how to wrap everything up. I always like to finish with this one. This is a quote that Ben Benoit said, when people would come to the Chippewa National Forest to recreate, or people would come to work at the supervisor's office. And it's a job. You get a paycheck every week, every other week, or what have you. And he said, this is our home. The decisions you're making on the Chippewa National Forest are decisions you're making about Leech Lake's homeland. And Ben was very passionate about that, and I just like having this slide. And like BJ alluded to, the first TFPA we did, I remember going up and talking to my boss, Rich Robinson, who was the guy who hired me. I got a special spot in my heart for him. And I asked him, there's this thing, this legislation called Tribal Forest Protection Act. What do you want me to do? You know, I could go to the Chippewa National Forest and I'd say, you guys are gonna have to do something, but what do you want me to do, Rich? And he wrestled with it. He's just called me, you know, and he thought about what he wanted to say. And ultimately he came back with me. You know, I just want our woods back. That's it. That's all. Told me that in 2015. Our first TFPA came out in 2016. Every project I've done now since going forward, I take that one simple sentence. How do you work to try to get the woods back? One simple sentence. You science it up. You put all these layers together, and you try to build something that BJ's kids, other tribal members, their kids can enjoy. And even beyond, you know, human beings can enjoy. They can come up here and they can enjoy these wonderful lands that are the Leech Lake Reservation. With that, if anybody has any questions, now's the time.
Thank you for the presentation. I'd like to acknowledge I actually reached out to Keith last year for a TFPA example when we were working with National Forest in North Carolina, and we took their example and wrote our own and executed it in November of last year. So we appreciate the camaraderie for, you know, just sending an email, hey, can I get a call? This is what we're trying to do. Can we get your example? Sure thing. So really appreciate you, Keith. Going back to your presentation at the beginning, I'm really interested to learn more about. I got a question and learn more about what is the framework for the shared decision-making model that you mentioned, and do you have is it a shareable document, and then how does the Leech Lake Tribe ensure accountability to that model from working with the Chippewa National Forest?
When that was put together, I mean, in 2019, the shared decision-making model, I mean, a lot of it's written into the MOU, you know, that we're going to work together. You know, it's just, this is what we're going to do. And there is a lot of arbitration language in there where if we don't feel like that's happening, you know, then we invoke that language and we put it into arbitration. We say, you know, this isn't a shared decision. You know, this is your decision with our stamp on it, or however it would be. A lot of people that know me would say I'm a pessimist and the glass is half empty, you know. But I'm learning, and I'm really optimistic that I don't know that we're going to ever have to enter into that arbitration. You know, just in my time working at Leech Lake, you know, I've seen the openness, the de-siloing, if you will, of Chippewa National Forest staff, and I think they need to be commended. I always feel like I'm badgering them and just kind of hard on them, but I mean, there's a few of them sitting there. I mean, if I can I get a round of applause for the Chippewa National Forest staff? And we're trying to make true partners out of this, so I think it's moving in a good direction, and they speak to us in a good way, so it's all good.
Any more questions? I just really want to quick thank the Nature Conservancy too, because they've been really critical in helping us with our monitoring, Kathy and Jim.